So here's the family tree for the Agee family that starts with Matthew Agee, who was the original Huguenot to come over from France. And we'll look at some of his information in just a minute on a separate page. But we'll go down the line real quick just to show you how many generations there are removed from Matthew. So we'll start with him, go down to Reverend J.W. Agee, and then to Noah Alfred Agee, which I have some interesting information on as well that I'll share in a minute. John Mask Agee, Nelson H. Agee. This gets into the middle of the 1800s now. James N. Agee, that's a name that we know and have seen a lot from him being around here. Then Myrtle, and then of course Lalu. It goes all the way down to her. So here's the information on Matthew Agee that came out of the Agee book that we have. And it talks about how he came over here as one of the Huguenots and had to give up his nobility in France when he did that. And he came over after doing that involuntarily, even though he was born of a noble birth. So he was a young man. He witnessed persecutions that they say were rampant then. The conditions in his native land caused him to flee. He didn't like what was going on. You've probably read all this, but it's still some good stuff, to go back and see. It's interesting, it said in Virginia, he became a leading citizen and a man of influence in his community and was ever true and faithful to all activities and contacts. So that makes him sound like instructions for a tax return instead of something else. So it talks about how he came on one of the ships that brought the Huguenots over in 1700 and 1701. Even though there's no name of the ships here, it says he appears regularly in the list of parish churches that were here about that same time. So they're comfortable. That's when he came over. He did get lots of land, it looks like. He got several patents of lands for 400 acres each. Those you can read here and see the detail on those. I'll show a map here in just a second that shows exactly where this was. It looks like the original part of it was in Powhatan County, Virginia, which we'll look at on the map here in a minute, as well as Flat Rock, which I haven't been able to find on a map, a current modern map. This is more information on how he deeded land over to his son and how the records were destroyed by fire. So this is the story of when he got here, and I can show on a map here exactly where Powhatan County is located. If you start off in Richmond here, just to get bearings, you can see this is Richmond, Virginia area, and the Powhatan area, Powhatan, is just to the west, almost due west of there. So the other information that's interesting is how Matthew's grandson, Noah, actually ended up in Alabama, where he died and was buried in Clark County in James Landing Cemetery, which was added to the Alabama Historic Register back in 2011. And what's interesting about this is it says here the cemetery contains 46 identifiable graves and 30 unmarked graves, the oldest of which is Noah Agee, who died in 1823. He was a white plantation owner and is the only white person known to be buried in this African-American cemetery. So I don't know if he owned land around there and the other people buried were descendants of his slaves or perhaps his slaves. So that'd be something interesting to research next. The cemetery where he and the potential slaves are buried is at James Chapel Baptist Church. And you can see it's kind of due north of Mobile a little bit and southwest of Montgomery. Looks like maybe 60 or 70 miles. And it's interesting in looking at all the other family history, there were several other of the lines that came through this part of Alabama at one point or another. And be interesting to know if they ever lived very close to each other or knew who each other were. Some of them were even over in Mississippi in this area right here, just a little bit to the west. So on the Miller side, Mary Matilda Chisholm was Kager Miller's wife. That's the grave that we saw down in Athens. And if you go up from her, her parents were William Chisholm and Dorothy Swanson. You can go up, staying on the Chisholm name, all the way up to George W. Chisholm, it looks like, back in the late 1700s. So I don't know if it has any information on him or not in terms of where he lived. Let's take a look. So he was born in Georgia, St. Philip's Parish. Uh, George Washington Chisholm, another presidential name in there. Married Penelope Fraser. She passed away, it looks like, in 1837, and then he died in Columbia, Georgia, when he was 68. So, interesting facts about him. Go back and see her father. He was born on September 11th in Walton, Georgia. So they all came from Georgia. And he died in Mississippi, probably in that area that we looked at on the map just a minute ago for the Agee burial in Alabama. So yeah, you can see where he's buried a little bit more to the north. The Agee cemetery would be about right here, but you can see where he was born and how he migrated up there.